everyone. Welcome to the EV Advisory Podcast, where we bring practical expert advice to British Columbia residents and businesses looking to install EV charging in their buildings. So in this podcast, our host, JM Toriel, lead EV advisor at Plug-in BC, will sit down with Sukhdeep Gill, president of Cielo Charging, to unpack how EV charging infrastructures is evolving across multi-unit residential buildings. In this episode, you will learn how strata councils and property owners can plan smarter installations, why energy management and flexible charging network matters, and how EV-ready buildings becoming a more key factor in property value and future-proof living. See you then.
The EV Advisory is an official podcast of the EV Advisor program with myself as host, JM Toriel, at the Fraser Basin Council, whose location is at the Vancouver offices on the unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples, also known as downtown Vancouver. The EV Advisor program is funded by the Ministry of Energy and Climate Solutions and the Government of British Columbia as part of the Clean BC Go Electric initiative. Our outreach mission through this podcast is to serve you, the listening public, with helpful advice through conversations with leading experts. Let's get right into the conversation with basically a background as to how you got into the EV world in the first place and why you wanted to start this company and basically the history of the company getting to where you are now.
Well, first and foremost, thank you for having me here. Very excited, and I think for everyone in the EV space, it's a special time as we see a lot of changes coming up. Overall, what has got us into the EV spaces, if we're to take it back about 12 or so years, initially it was solar. So it was solar distributed generation, whether it was abroad, the uptake abroad, or companies like Solar City and what they were offering to down south. So solar really got the ball going for us, and that led to things such as energy efficiency upgrades, which naturally we got into electric vehicles. Initially, as over the years, we've seen rapid uptake increase of EVs, so as has a need for the charging infrastructure. So at present, about 8 years ago, since then we've been focusing solely on the EV charging space, mostly in the multi-unit space. So whether it's high-rise, mid-rise, low-rise townhomes, and we essentially work with stratas from initial information gathering to design to installation to in-servicing that may be required after the fact.
So that would include, you mentioned like the data collection, so basically how each resident is consuming the energy through the equipment in more accurate levels of measurement, such as kilowatt hours.
So in terms of the overall process, we typically start off with an electric vehicle ready plan, which is essentially the prerequisite to the Clean BC program. Right. If one is to pursue the infrastructure upgrades and possibly even the chargers. So at that stage of things, it's very preliminary. So we're actually getting, even no two buildings, for example, are alike. Right? So we're getting to know the building, the occupants of that building, and what their needs are. Right? Whether some folks may not have a car, and the folks that do may be driving out to Abbotsford or Chilliwack. So we have to reflect those charging performances and look at what is just advisable also. So we start off with an electric vehicle ready plan, and then we could get into the specifics of what their daily commutes are, what their energy requirements are, and one of the last things we'll probably do is look at the type of charger that is needed, right? But initially we just want to get a better understanding of the occupants, the electrical services for the site, and then we'll put it all together essentially to reflect that particular site's needs.
Okay, great. So basically you're accommodating the needs of the strata that you're...
Exactly.
Yeah, excellent. So the rebate program refers to the term EV charger for more understandable and general terms for the public. Though this is technically incorrect, as the EV supply equipment is, as we know, the proper term. The reason being that EVs charging at level 2 or level 1 most commonly with the plug that came with the purchase of the vehicle itself, and just from like a 110 outlet, is usually deemed as not quite efficient, and it wouldn't be accommodated in the rebate program as well, as it's only for level 2 charging. But it does supply AC power to the car's internal charger that converts it to DC power and flows to the battery. So DCFC, or DC fast charging, is only available at charging hubs like the infamous Tesla superchargers or the BC Hydro network, or on the Run networks as examples of public charging stations, which actually do charge batteries directly and much faster at the DC level. So it's basically DC to DC. How would you describe the general knowledge among BC drivers regarding this and other EV topics on charging specifically? And have you noticed any changes as far as how the people that you deal with are knowledgeable on the EVs as well as the charging that they've faced over the years?
Sure. So I think over the years we've seen a tremendous amount of information become available, whether it's vehicle specific to charging needs, and I think the general public, the conversations have really shifted from will EVs work to what they're looking for in a particular EV, right? Whether it's 3-row seating, whether it's storage, whether it's towing capacity, whether it's range. So I think the dialogue has shifted tremendously over the years as we've seen the uptake increase, and I think the types of questions that we're getting are, I wouldn't say that they are fundamental questions, and I think sometimes they're actually very specific questions. So overall, I think it's been tremendous growth in that sense.
Yeah, I've seen that as well. It's been quite the roller coaster ride for sure. So can you describe the importance of network charging and why open protocol or the OCPP is so important? And what is the latest version available, and should stratas consider this when planning for installing EV charging stations in their parkades?
Sure. So, well, I look at OCPP as because I try not to use too much industry jargon in that sense. So I think of OCPP equals flexibility, right? Like overall flexibility, so you're not stuck with a particular hardware and a network operator, right? So you want to have flexibility, so you want to make sure your equipment is OCPP, right? Providing you flexibility to change network operators should the need arise. And over the years, we've had projects where we've had to migrate from network operator A to B, but the hardware has remained constant, right? As long as that device can eventually connect to the internet, whether it's cellular or typically Wi-Fi. So those are two common protocols in terms of communication. So overall, I think OCPP is a must for all projects. In terms of the latest, I think we're now starting to see, it's a bit early, but we're starting to see 2.01. So that will be the next wave of OCPP, and we'll hopefully very soon start seeing plug and charge, and commonly, I should say, and things such as vehicle to grid and just plug and charge as per the reference. There would be no apps, cards from a user perspective, so just making it more convenient, right? And I think if the more things become convenient, the further adoption would increase.
Okay, and just to further that, so I think one of the attractive features of, say, the Tesla versus other electric vehicles up to now has been the ability to just literally plug in and have that charging commence without the need to go onto a different app or charge onto your credit card or anything like that. So that's what you refer to as direct plug and charge.
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah. So I always advise purchasers of EVSE to carefully consider and compare warranties and the longevity of the coverage when deciding which network station to decide on. Are there any companies that stand out for you in this regard? Are there some good examples of companies that replace parts effectively and quickly in your experience?
Sure. Well, I think overall, in terms of warranties, I think typically we would want to advise our clients that we want to consider projects which have a 5-year warranty on the hardware, which is very, it's not necessarily a standard at this point, but I think you narrow down the really good manufacturers from subpar, right? I think 5 years is a considerable amount of time for a warranty, and those that really truly make a quality product will stand by their product. So I think the 5-year is a really good benchmark for a warranty. And I think rather than specific companies, I think the fundamental things, if we go back to OCPP, so interoperability, whether it's energy management, as uptake increases, we would anticipate rate changes, whether they come from BCUC and eventually BC Hydro announced that. So I would anticipate some sort of rate changes. So having the ability to leverage and having an energy management system in place will have long-term benefits. You might not see it today. You might just need a power sharing configuration. But I think as uptake increases, as rates evolve, I think energy management will be a critical component, and then I think in terms of and having local support, right? Some of the manufacturers are solely, whether they're out east or down south or elsewhere. I think having local support in British Columbia is a must, right? It's and overall, as we're well aware, whether it's the public charging network, whether it's EV uptakes, whether it's the Clean BC multi-unit programs, I think all these things need local support rather than having to call a number abroad.
Excellent. So have you found that the local support has been kind of growing here in Vancouver, given the rate of adoption that we have, especially in the Metro Vancouver area? Have you found that, given the level of adoption and I guess demand and the ability to supply that demand for these companies, do you find that there's been a greater effort for the local network of individuals that have the ability to cater to that?
Well, I think supply and demand in that sense of I think these companies, these network operators, these manufacturers are starting to see the uptake, right? That's and I think they're making investments locally based on that, right? So we're starting to see not just initially it would be like 1 or 2 manufacturers. Now we have a good range of selection to choose from locally, at least local support perspective. There's not manufacturing or that's not quite happening. I wouldn't say a manufacturing perspective, but I think from a support perspective, I think that's where it starts, and we're starting to see it increase from many network operators.
That's good to hear. So let's go on to another topic of, most level 2 EVSE chargers have what's called the J1772 protocol in place, or what's also referred to as the J-plug. Now, there's been a pretty big transition over the last 6 months to a year in the OEMs, the manufacturers of the vehicles themselves, at least in North America, coming to terms with wanting to basically have one North American standard. And it seems that through a process of discussions and basically an acknowledgement of the ease of use, I guess, of what's deemed as, I guess, the Tesla protocol, or the North American charging standard, SAE J3400, as it's also known. And for a while there, it was quite interesting to watch, I think, Ford initially, and then pretty well all the other OEMs, the major ones, have come on board, including the German manufacturers that pretty well invented the more European standard, which is the CCS1, and here the CCS2 SAE standard. So now that has kind of transpired over this last year, and it's mostly been focused in the media anyway on the DC fast charging side of things, as to having access to the supercharger network that Tesla's has established over the years. But given that there is obviously going to be a transition, we were just at the Everything Electric show over this last weekend, and already we're starting to see the OEMs start to put in that new protocol in place. So given this, do you see that the actual AC charging will transition accordingly as well? And have you already noticed that a lot of the companies that you deal with are announcing or even having the EVSE stations with that protocol in place? And how do you see that moving forward?
Well, I think it will be. It's like if we step back, and there was a double CHAdeMO at one point, and the CCS. So overall, we are starting to see, and there's an appetite for it from the consumers, from the EV buyers. Right. So these are discussions that we've had with numerous manufacturers, and it is something. It's not necessarily commonly available, but it is something that they are working towards, and it'll be a matter of selecting which one, right? So I think we're closing in on that point, but we're not exactly there yet. But I think we're very close to where it'll be okay. How long of a cord end do you want, and what kind of cord end do you want? Well, up until now, it's been mostly the J17 J plug. So it's I think it's very close to being readily offered and available for the general public.
Yeah, I think the trick for the industry is, offering some kind of, ability to switch, not the whole unit itself, but just the cord, right? So essentially, the system and the network would still be in place. The hardware, for the most part, would stay as is. But the cord running from the station to the vehicle, or even just the end of the cord itself, would be able to switch out. I assume that's kind of how it's going to transpire, but I guess we're only starting to see this come into play.
Yeah, so that in the ideal world, that would be a great scenario. It's just leaving the hardware and just changing out the cord end essentially for whichever option the owner prefers. Yeah. But I think that'll be in the near future.
And I would also be curious as to what costs would be involved in that, if you've seen anything along those lines.
In terms of costs, I think they can vary. It's just subject to the manufacturers and exactly what needs to be done. But in certain cases, there are adapters that come with the vehicle, and I've seen some folks just leave the adapter, and for their private charger in their assigned parking stall or parking garage, they would just leave their adapter on the J plug, and then it's essentially serving the same same purpose as an axe without having to fiddle around every time. So overall, I think the adapters have been somewhat helpful, but at the same time, whether it's adapters or RFID cards, I think just getting rid of them entirely for convenience, because that's where everything is shifting to. Initially, the very early adopters would have no issues with adapters. I remember meeting people where they would actually have it was like dealing with a wholesaler, and they'd have like 8 different adapters, right? Just in case they went to the interior, they would have like a range plug, a dryer, a welding outlet, and it's like they had all these contraptions in the car. And I'm sure you've met people over the years, so it's but I think where things are now is it's just less adapters, less fobs, less apps, the better.
Yeah. Same as you mentioned with especially DC charging, so for more on the road, type scenario where you're doing a road trip, of which I should say that I just came back from a family road trip where we covered 4,000 kilometers in our Tesla Y that we own as a family, and I have an adapter, and that's to be able to use other networks other than the supercharger network with Tesla, which, as you mentioned, is very convenient with the plug-and-drive feature that's always been a real, I guess, kind of special sauce feature that Tesla's had over the years. But now, you're going to the supercharger stations and noticing that there's a number of other vehicles charging at the same time, which was not the case, not even a year plus ago. So to have that accessibility is just really good to see, in that respect. And I'm assuming that it's transpiring as well in parkades across BC as well, where there's going to be more of a move over, I guess, to the NACS as a kind of more aesthetically pleasing way of charging. It's a lighter way to charge, but even Teslas have had the adapters. Basically, once a purchase is made for a Tesla, they would have the adapter for the J1772 plug or the J plug, given how many AC units are available to the public as well. So that was understood from a very early stage, I think, in this kind of moving from early adopter phase, crossing the chasm into kind of more the mainstream.
Yeah.
So that's been interesting to see. So how does Cielo's offerings differ from other companies that are out there doing virtually the same thing as far as installing EV infrastructure? How does Cielo differ from everyone else?
Good question. I think overall, fundamentally, we start off with there's a few key components. There's no two buildings alike, right? So the needs for each specific individual to their building and their electrical systems are going to be different, right? So we start off by an educational component to it, right? One, we want to learn about end consumers, and two, we want to give them information pertaining to EVs, EV charging rebates, whether there's initiatives that they could take part in, whether it's a low carbon fuel standard, so on. But I think fundamentally what sets us apart is we want to be a resource for British Columbians, and we want to ensure that they have the information to be essentially prepared to buying an electric vehicle is a big decision and commitment.
Well, that's really reassuring, because essentially as EV advisors, that's part of what we do, and often that is a piece that's missing, from many of your competitors, I guess, in the educational component especially, because we, are often in the position where that is part of what we offer. as value to the end user and the stratas and whatnot that are looking at putting EV charging in their building. They come to us hopefully at the beginning, of the whole process where they really don't know where to start, and we set them, on this, taking the two directions of either going EV ready, which is the more holistic approach, and maybe we should define that. So it's actually defined as the parking space must have a termination point in an electrical wiring installation to power a level 2 electric vehicle supply equipment, EVSE. The termination point must be no more than 5 meters from any part of the parking stall it is supporting or the intended EVSE location. In the case where a junction box is serving more than one parking stall, the stalls it is supporting must be clearly labeled, including the electrical wiring within the junction box. So that is basically what EV ready is defined as. It's quite a lot of jargon there. It might not be that easy for anyone that's never really considered EV charging or very unfamiliar with the EV world, as I like to call it. So, getting back to that question, would you say that has been really helpful for kind of going to the retrofit rebate attributes that are in place, for this rebate program in particular that only cover retrofits, so not new buildings? Has it been really helpful in getting more buildings to sort of acknowledge the importance of a more holistic approach and future-proofing buildings and seeing the value in that?
Overall, I think the short answer would be yes. I think in terms of, I think it's just, especially in new builds, I think it's less things for a strata to deal with, right? Especially when a strata is getting formed, so on and so forth. So overall, I think just having that as a building bylaw has made significant advancements in adoption. I think overall it's just another item that has been done for the strata, and the stratas are volunteers. And I think it's just, and it adds to their overall property value, right? So it's overall, I think it's made a positive impact, and it's almost become the benchmark for existing also, right? When there's a tower getting built across the street or a low rise or whatever type of residential occupancy, it's typically EV ready, right? And that mindset also shifts the conversation for existing buildings where folks, it's just the big hurdle is folks want, for the most part, they'll want an EV, but they will not buy an EV due to the lack of charging. Rightfully so, right? As over the years, I've used the public charging network quite often, and it's and just the advancements and the availability and the amount of power I could get from a particular charger has increased a few folds, right? Well, it used to be a single fast charger, and now you'll see clusters of them, right? So overall, I think to get back to your question on the new construction, I think that has made positive impacts, and I think that's helping with the adoption on existing multi-unit settings also.
Yeah, because I think one of the main points that we try and provide as EV advisors is even if they come with us for advice on how do I put an EV charger in my stall. Like, it's just really looking at it individually to broaden that perspective and say, okay, this is going to be a decision that is actually going to impact the whole of the residents that are in your building. So given that there's probably other people that are also considering it in your building for one. So we tend to start the process by offering like a survey that the individual can ask all the other residents as to the level of interest in getting charging put in, not just for that one individual, but for the whole, all of the residents, because that really is the differential for what is termed EV ready versus the standalone option. So the two streams of just getting a few chargers put in versus at least putting the infrastructure in, with the wiring to enable level 2 charging for all residents in the building. And I think, I think if I might say from my own observations, I've noticed that, since I've been in this program in the last couple of years, where EV ready has really been the new standard from a new building perspective, and given that it's kind of trickled back into the value proposition that older buildings have when they want to go through a process of putting EV charging in, it's much easier to say, well, given that all new buildings are like this, you should also consider bringing your building to that same level and add value to residents, even if they don't have an electric vehicle. That this is a kind of consideration to really future-proof the building in that way. And the same approach would apply, even outside of stratas or condos, like apartment buildings and managers that own a number of buildings or one building, that they would also consider that, these people that are asked them to put in charging, even if they don't necessarily own the property, they might be leasing, that they're adding value or an amenity almost at this point, where this is something that should be in every building because, well, our adoption levels are at such a point that, especially in the lower mainland area, we're hovering in and around and above 20%. That is a significant amount of vehicles that are on the road right now. Even though most of them are, of course, new, there's a lot of new buildings going up, and they market it that way. Certainly it's something that people are looking for. I've heard stories where they'll have like an open house for like a large project, and if that's not like featured or they don't really know whether or not they're going to have EV charging, and the question comes up, then you might be losing people out the door, and because that is something that they're demanding as part of their lifestyle, as you mentioned before. Like, it really is a lifestyle shift, and if the place of residence does not meet those minimal lifestyle requirements of having overnight charging for their unit in a MURB scenario, a multi-unit residential building, then they're looking somewhere else for somewhere that has one. Given that Cielo offers a suite of options for networked EVSE EV chargers, is there some wisdom you could share for the listeners out there that are seeking energy management solutions and may not yet understand the benefits of network chargers and energy management systems?
Well, I think energy management is sometimes overall in the landscape of EV charging can sometimes be thrown around loosely, but overall I think the importance of it is a must. Right? It's one of those things where as adoption rises, it will become more and more clear on why you need it. Right? So it's and as these as the EPC hydro rates evolve, right? With energy management, it won't just be about charging the cars really fast. It'll be about charging at certain times, demand mitigation, time of use, so on and so forth. So I think energy management for projects is a must, and I think network chargers, so what is a network charger? It's a smart charger. It has the ability to connect to the internet, it has the ability to provide access control, billing, usage reports, power management, energy management, load balancing, etc. So overall, it's a smart connected device, and almost all the chargers that we're installing are network chargers nowadays with some form of energy management. And another benefit of having EV charging and network chargers in your parkade is typically you'll be able to connect to Wi-Fi. Right, that's just a natural benefit that you get, where you could now use that Wi-Fi for your personal devices. Parkades can at times be a very intimidating place. They're really big and you have no coverage typically, right? So having that ability to connect your personal device adds a layer of security, personal security, and also for vehicles, right? Over-the-air updates can take place for vehicles that are parked rather than having a hotspot or sitting across a coffee shop, which over the years, I'm sure you've had this conversation of folks doing similar things. So I think there's additional benefits that you get from having EV-ready infrastructure, a smart system, where I think the Wi-Fi and communication provides a tremendous value.
Absolutely, yeah. Having the benefit of a Wi-Fi network in place is beneficial. I should note that the Wi-Fi, installation wouldn't necessarily be covered with the rebate as part of the infrastructure eligibility, but it's certainly a feature that has a tremendous value for the building. How do you and your team at CLO approach MURB buildings at your first site visit as you prepare to offer a technical assessment that could become an electrical planning report or an EV-ready plan? And before you answer, we should explain that all stratas in BC are required to undergo what's called an EPR for short, or an electrical planning report, to determine the electrical capacity of a building by the end of 2028 for all of BC, but the end of 2026 for the regions of Metro Vancouver and Fraser Valley, as well as Greater Victoria, as per the Ministry of Housing. So it doesn't fall into the ministry that we normally deal with, the Ministry of Energy and Climate Solutions, but the Ministry of Housing. And just to quote, the Ministry of Housing requires all stratas in BC to conduct an electrical planning report for all stratas with 5 or more units, Part 3 and Part 9, it's a technical term of the size of the building, by a professional engineer, an applied science technologist, or a qualified journeyperson electrician. CLO was able to conduct both EPRs and EV-ready plans now needed for eligibility for EV-ready infrastructure, and standalone EV charging as well is always something not necessarily required, but a good thing to have. We always tell people. Is that correct? Do you do both the EPR and the EV-ready plan, and can you basically put them together? Basically, the two birds, one stone principle of, they're ready to kind of know what their capacity is. They have to do both, but maybe you can package it into, something so that it can be done at the same time.
Exactly. So overall, our offerings do entail an electric vehicle ready plan, and to ensure everything is synchronized, we suggest that the electrical planning report is completed at the same time. So, and there will be savings from a costing point of view. So there's efficiencies there of conducting both those reports simultaneously, and I think that overall deliverables are essentially enhanced when both those reports are synchronized, completed at the same time, so on and so forth. So that's typically the suggestion when we are approached by a strata, is to complete both simultaneously, and the EPR will highlight essentially all electrical systems, whereas the EV Ready is based on charging infrastructure.
That's great, and I'm sure that adds tremendous value to the strata that are considering obviously EV charging if they're going to you, but also able to do the EPR requirement. And I should note that they do have to be two separate reports. They would be submitted separately because one is going to the Ministry of Housing or for their own purpose, but it's something that's required through that ministry. Obviously, the EV Ready plan is not required, but there is the rebate of up to $3,000 available to any condo complex or MURB that wants to put EV ready infrastructure in place and down the line chargers as well. So thanks very much for pointing that out. I think that pretty well covers all the technical things we want to go over, and thanks so much for your time on this. Just for fun, I'd like to ask people, getting more into the broad scale of, what makes this kind of world kind of fun. We talked about kind of the efficiency of EVs, and that's kind of a lot of what brought you into this realm, starting with solar and eventually coming into like EV charging and whatnot. But, I always tell people apples and oranges when they're comparing an ICE, the internal combustion engine, to a fully electric vehicle especially. But, EV would plug-in EVs would also fall under the EV category. Hybrids do not. They still run on gas. So there's no rebate associated with them, and nor do I ever see a time where they would receive a rebate for hybrids, although they are still very popular. But, there are lots of great EVs out there now. There's a lot of options. As mentioned, we just participated in that show down the road here at the convention center over the weekend, where there's, I think, up to 90 different models available for test driving. North America doesn't even have access to a lot of the models that are available in places like Europe and especially places like Malaysia and China in particular. That's seeing a huge growth in that sector. But just, for your own kind of personal likes and whatnot and preferences, what do you consider your favorite or the top 3 EVs that are available right now?
Available right now? Well, I've been driving a Bolt since 2017, so I'll probably have that on there. Driven almost, I think, 250,000 kilometers or so. So I don't intend on getting rid of that car ever, hopefully.
Yeah, super efficient.
Yeah, it's a very efficient. It's a good sized vehicle. I use it a lot for work. I can park anywhere I want. So it's a good compact vehicle. I like the Kona. The Kona EV is slightly, it feels bigger. So we recently got a Kona, and then I guess top 3, if I was to pick one, I'd probably take the e-Transit, the van. Right.
Yeah.
I'm intrigued by that. So
that's
Ford e-Transit. Yeah. So I think those would be my top 3: the Chevy Bolt, ID Kona, and the Ford e-Transit.
That's a good mix. You have Hyundai Kona, the GM Chevy Bolt, and the Ford e-Transit, which is more of a commercial vehicle. So yeah, thanks for sharing that. And last question, if you had a wish or like a magic wand to change one thing, what would it be?
Well, I think if I had a wish or magic wand to change one thing, even how these projects internally are structured from a strata point of view, right? I think I think there's a need for additional support, right? I think what the folks like your team is doing, the EV advisors are doing, I think that is, I think now is probably the time to get more folks involved from the advisory side, and and be involved with the strata. But I think if one thing we could change is maybe a lower voting threshold for approval, right? Which I get. I think with the CRF route, I think is 51%.
50 plus 1.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. So it's whereas I think the special levy is still 75%. Right. So I think maybe putting both those would be a good route. But again, of course, I have a biased opinion in the industry, and at the same time, it's a lot of expenses are being incurred, right, by folks. So it's I have to be a bit mindful of my comments towards that.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
But one thing I'll add on a side note is I think the used EV market, I think I was on Auto Trader this morning, and it was showing close to like 19,000 electric vehicles available.
Wow.
Right? So I think there's a good stockpile of options.
Yeah, definitely.
Right? It doesn't necessarily have to be a brand new vehicle, and I think I've bought 2 used EVs over the years, and they've worked great. I have no complaints. Right?
Yeah, so this is, I think, we're I guess fortunate in many ways that we live in a province that still very much supports EV adoption and under mandate to do so. So even with these shifts even at the federal level here in Canada and south of the border and globally, we're still moving in the right direction. And I think, having those rebates in place to continue that trajectory is of utmost importance. So I would just add that to your wish, that's also my wish. And thank you very much for having this conversation with me today, and really appreciate your time and wisdom and your insight on all things EV charging, and really appreciate your time here.
I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Thank you, Jim.
Thanks, Sukhdeep. Really appreciate it. Plug-in BC strives to inform you with expert advice to assist you with your EV charging needs. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and review us wherever you get your podcasts or on this YouTube channel. Plug-in BC on our socials, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. You can also check us out on our informative website at pluginbc.ca, where you can also sign up for our newsletter. I'm J.M. Toriel, advising you to plug in BC.